free. Let's talk about them hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there. Let's talk about the dogwoods and Appalachian hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there. Have everybody's attention, please. I'd like to introduce Miss Cassie to the podcast. Y'all gather around now.
It's because of the restrictions, except for the fact that I was press. So I was an essential worker. So anywhere we went, when we'd go out as a family anyway, I would take my press badge with me, and if we ever got bothered, I just whipped it out, and they left us alone. Happened twice that way. I remember one time we went up to Sugg Farm down in Holly Springs. It's this big farm area, like a lot of land. They use it for big events. And we decided it was a really windy day, so I'm like, we're going to go do an experiment with kinetic energy. We're going to go fly kites. So I had a whole lesson plan for them. I made them read about it and everything, the science behind it and everything, and about the physics of kites and that kind of stuff. And then we went out and flew them. And they had a ball, and that was like the highlight of being locked in for them. Thank God they had each other, though. I mean, I can't imagine being a kid with no siblings.
Yeah.
Locked in the house with your parents who are like freaking out. We drank a lot, but we never really freaked out about it. We were concerned at first, in the first couple months, but then concern turned to skepticism, and that turned into anger. And then when they allowed the partial in-person stuff in Wake County finally, and they had to wear the masks and everything, both my kids were just blah. And they said when they got to school, nobody was wearing them properly. Everyone had their nose hanging out. Like, nobody was paying attention. Even the teachers were not really wearing them. But yet they still had to continue to wear them all the time. So I got them, for your glasses, how you can have the little hook and chain. I got them that for their mask so that when they went to lunch, they didn't have to lay it down on a counter or do anything. It could just dangle around their neck. And one of the teachers contacted me. She's like, "You're a genius." She's like, "Where did you get these?" I'm like, "I got like 100 of them off of Amazon. We're only using 4. I'll send the rest to your classroom." So I sent them in next time. And she's like, thank you. But it totally worked. And I remember the last day of masking, North Carolina was like 5th to last to unmask their kids nationwide. And I'm walking my youngest to the bus, and he's got the mask hanging on, and I said, "This is the last day you're going to have to wear that, kid." He looks at me and goes, "Thank God." He's like, "Don't they understand that masks are the Pizzagate of COVID," is what he said. I went, "Pizzagate of COVID?" He's in like 5th grade. I'm looking at him going, I go, "How do you know about Pizzagate?" He goes, "I know all about the Clinton crime family, Mom." I'm like, "Oh my God, what YouTube channels are you watching?" So I immediately went home and checked his history. He was watching a lot of PragerU and Ben Shapiro and stuff, even at that age. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to say no to that.
COVID radicalized your 10-year-old?
It did. And my oldest, it ruined his 7th and 8th grade. Like, they were supposed to have this moving up ceremony and a trip to New York City or Washington, D.C. Supposed to do all this stuff. All of it was canceled. He completely screwed him over, and he was mad.
But
yeah.
I have PTSD, and so when COVID hit, I had just been diagnosed with tumid lupus. And so they say that just because you get tumid lupus doesn't mean you're going to get systematic, but my ANA is really, really high. And so when COVID hit, I was freaking out because would be high risk.
Yeah.
And so my family were very, you have to get the shot. And like an idiot, I went and got the shot. I made my husband get the shot.
We didn't.
And I get the shot, like, I want to say it was a day or 2 days after my second shot, my heart just started racing, and it continued to race. And so I go to a local cardiologist who sends me up here to Raleigh to see an
electrocardiogram?
Yeah, electrocardiologist. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but I had to go I want to say it was for over a year. I was constantly coming and getting the heart monitor put on. So that they could figure out exactly what I had. And they basically told me, they were like, well, you've always had tachycardia, which is true. I had an episode when I was about 18, and there's been a couple of times where I noticed my heart was racing for no.
The shot exacerbated that, though.
That's what they said. At Duke, that's what they said. They were like, we think that the shot made this worse.
My stepmother developed AFib. She's like multi-boosted and all that kind of stuff. And after that, her Apple smartwatch told her that she had a problem, like with her heart rate and everything. So she went to the doctor and they diagnosed her with AFib. And I was like, she never had any problems with it before all the shots. And I was like, okay.
I didn't get another. I didn't get boosted. My heart seems to have gotten better. It still happens sometimes, and it's scary. I mean, we're talking, I would wake up out of a dead sleep for no reason. Out of a dead sleep, my heart rate would be like 180. Yeah. We would go sit in the hospital.
That the shot added gasoline to whatever pre-existing things might have been in a person, and that includes cancer. Cancer rates have just gone outer limits since the shots went around the world.
What infuriates me that Cooper was pushing this. You had to do this. Yeah, I mean, the things he was trying to force on the people during COVID was insane.
I remember it all very clearly because I was dead in the middle of it. I had nothing else to do but sit on my computer and watch it all unfold.
When I told Matt Mercer that I wanted to sit down with somebody who knew a lot about Cooper, he mentioned you. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So how did you become somebody that Matt Mercer considers like a Cooper?
Well, Matt used to be my editor. He was, when I joined North State Journal, he was newly the editor-in-chief of North State Journal. And he was already a seasoned Politico himself. He had been traveling in those circles for longer than I had, really. I hadn't really been affiliated with the Republican Party or anything like that. I was registered as a Republican at one point. I was also registered as a Democrat. Now I'm unaffiliated. I've been unaffiliated since about 2016. I wanted to be able to throw stones at both houses, basically. But Matt was, he was my editor-in-chief, and he left a couple of years ago to go over to the NCGOP, and I still haven't forgiven him. He and I had some really great sidebars, and he had some really great insights. Very good at directing stories that needed to be told. I've sort of picked up where he left off in that regard, but that's how we came to know each other, and we're still friends. We still chat.
I get shocked because I feel like people don't know how bad Roy Cooper was when he was in office. And I'm like, how could you not know? Like, you were living here. How do you not know?
Well, I mean, it all started back in 2016 when he first ran and everything. When he was Attorney General, he refused to defend the state against HB2. You know, the lawsuits that came with that and everything. And most people don't realize that HB2 was a reaction to the Charlotte Ordinance, which allowed for all sex bathrooms, public and private, locker rooms and everything. I mean, anyone could go anywhere with that thing. And he originally didn't want to touch it. He said he didn't want to get involved in it. But then when he started to run, he started to see what giant deal it was. He immediately adopted it, and that became like the centerpiece of his campaign in 2016. He even went out of state to recruit companies to boycott us during that. And the Wall Street Journal covered that too. I covered it as well. I wrote some freelance articles. I contracted with a couple outlets who wanted articles on that, so they contacted me back in the day, and I wrote for those. So he moved into that area there, but I mean, he really made HB2 his whole thing. And you know, now his campaign, he's a moderate. No, he's never been a moderate. He's always towed the party line. He's always had a progressive bent to everything that he's done. He just hasn't been quite as vocal about it. But if you look at his vetoes, of which he had 104 during his 2 terms, which was 75% of all governors at that point. There was like 139 vetoes at that point, and of his were 104. If you look at any one of his veto rejection messages, they're all of an ideological objection. There are very few parts of any of them that are truly about the actual legislation. or make a lot of them misconstrue what's in the actual legislation. He just wanted to veto it because he doesn't like it. I mean, he vetoed the protecting women's sports. He vetoed the one about gender surgeries and hormone replacement for trans youth and everything, which now we're seeing the blowback from that. I mean, the lawsuits that are coming down right, left, and center on this case, where former transitioned people are now suing because they felt like they were forced into it or hoodwinked or psychologically brainwashed over it. And a lot of these things are irreversible. These people have done damage to their bodies, and that's really sad. But he vetoed that one, and of course the legislature overrode both of those because they had the supermajority at the time. So and early in his tenure too, I mean, there were issues with transparency. He would put out these calendars where it would basically say he's just going to be holding business and meetings all day, nothing else. And he had this tendency to slip out of state and go do fundraising or go to efforts out of state and not tell anybody because he didn't want the lieutenant governor, Dan Forest at the time, to know where he was going. And because he would be acting governor while he was gone. So that was always a problem. He also, I think it was WRL did a story about how he only sent 8 emails while he was Attorney General, like personal emails. He stayed away from it. He doesn't have a paper trail. There's a direct, willful, purposeful intent to make sure he doesn't have anything behind him that people can point to that he actually wrote or that he actually did. Other than when he became governor, I mean, you have all of his executive orders out there, one of which has been highlighted recently with the racial justice task force that he put together right after George Floyd. That one has been highlighted a lot lately. That task force made a lot of recommendations, like loosening restrictions around marijuana, cashless bail, these kinds of policies. And whether or not those policies actually translated into action at the county levels or at the judicial level, we're uncertain of, because I've been trying to track down his records from when he was governor, and the archives is telling me they still don't have them. Leading up to a major Senate race, and they still don't have his records. That's a little sus right there. But that task force was headed up, co-chaired by now Governor Josh Stein and sitting Associate Justice Anita Earls, who's running for re-election right now and who just, I believe, was endorsed by former Attorney General Eric Holder, contempt of Congress holder. That guy's, he's a dangerous guy. He runs the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And that thing was set up specifically to counter Republican gains in state houses and in Congress and that kind of thing, because that's what happened during the Tea Party wave. They saw what happened in the state houses and losing the governorships. More were lost under Obama during that first run of the Tea Party than any other time. So after they got out of office, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee got set up, and they have basically been trying to, quote, thwart gerrymandering around the country when Democrats have been doing the majority of that gerrymandering up until now.
Some of the historical maps that you can look at online from our voting districts here in North Carolina are appalling.
Like the one when Cooper was in the Senate. That one, the weird one that looks like a kind of weird dragon duck, goes all the way up, that one was sued over. That's still, to me, was kind of astounding that map even existed. But, so there's a transparency thing with him for sure. I can't remember a single records request that the Cooper administration really ever responded to for North State Journal. During COVID, it was worse. They held these briefings almost every day. I mean, there was over 100 and something of these things. They ran for over 500 days, these COVID briefings. And in the very beginning, we got a question in, but then about a week or so after, they started using a system called Maestro Conference. And Maestro Conference allowed them to basically look and see who was logged in, what outlet they were with, and then pick and choose who they wanted to ask their questions of. So it didn't matter the order that you logged in or that you hit 1 to ask a question. They were going to pick who they were going to pick. And they shut out North State Journal for over 400 days using that system. And so we would put our questions in writing and we would send them on, and they were never answered. So that should tell you that he didn't want to answer the questions that we were asking.
Well, I mean, we've all seen the video of him where I can't remember what question somebody asked, but he just ran away. Literally. I mean, he literally just runs away from the lady asking the question.
He uses his staff and his supporters to sort of protect him in those situations. Since he started running, there's been several videos of him being asked a question on the street or leaving a polling site or, you know, an event or something, and he completely doesn't even look at them. He just keeps going. And some of his staffers have come up and put up signs in front of the cameras and that kind of thing. It's it's comical in a way, but you know, it's par for the course. I mean, did they really expect he was going to answer them? No. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And now running against Michael Whatley, former NC GOP chair, former RNC chair. I mean, he effectively helped Trump get in the second time. He ran a strong campaign nationally. He's running against him, and since he doesn't have a political background as an elected official, they're having to dig around. They're having to try to make him out to be some kind of oil lobbyist because he held a job for an oil company at one point in time. And I think the most recent one that I saw dug up was he had a bunch of speeding tickets and things that he didn't pay and might have had contempt of court charges. I'm like, really?
Yeah. Did you also see there's one that came out about Cooper that says that there was basically a bunch of sexual harassment and assaults going on at some of his events? Did you see that one?
No, I haven't seen that yet.
I saw that one yesterday, but I hadn't had a chance to dig into it yet.
That might align with some of the other stories that I've heard in the background. I've heard a few wild party rumors and that sort of thing that's been going on. I've also heard some interesting insight from former law enforcement. I'm working on a story that I'm hoping that will come out next month. It deals with the 2020 riots in Raleigh and what went down that night, but also surrounding that. Those individuals who have come forward, they're retired law enforcement, they've come forward and they've told me some stories about the governor only living part-time at the mansion and really actually residing in his Raleigh home during a certain part of that era. And also he had some kind of house sitter there who he was close friends with, and I don't know anything about that, but there were some stories that came out of there that they'd be rumors, so I'm not going to repeat them, but it was the kind of thing that kind of raised an eyebrow or two. But he manages to make sure that none of this ever comes out. He's got enough people in positions of power that tamp down on these things so that nothing big comes out. I mean, just in this last year alone, we learned that he has an ex-wife who he basically, dropped like a hot potato because he wanted to run for office, and she wasn't interested in that. And he told her after the fact, after he filed. So, I mean, there's an interesting overlap there. And he was allegedly working at the same time in the same place as Kristin Cooper, and she was married to someone else at the time, and two of his daughters, I believe, are hers, and one is his, or it could be the other way around. It could be two are his, one is hers. But he adopted at least one of them. I found the adoption records and the court records, so at least one is from her former marriage. So, I mean, we didn't know a lot of these things. A lot of his early Senate days, you'd have to go to the archives to look up anything that he did there.
Kristin's interesting too, though. If I remember correctly, she's the lady who was flipping off kids who were protesting against Cooper policies, right?
There were some of those reopen NC protests, which was that was an interesting time period there because these folks were coming out, they were owning businesses that had been closed, they're losing money, they come to Raleigh to protest, and they're immediately met with, like an overwhelming show of police force. I went to one where there was a SWAT team set up around the corner. Yeah. For these moms and dads and their little kids in strollers, right? Yeah, so I went down to one of these protests, and they were protesting, and I didn't see it happen. Apparently it happened before I got there. But she drove by in a car and flipped them off out the window and called them crazies or something like that, Trump crazies or something like that, and drove away. And then our private Facebook page, she made an apology about that. We actually have this up at North State Journal. I just covered the story at the time because I found the post and I archived it. But she apologized. She said it wasn't one of her best moments or proudest moments or something like that. I'm like, who flips off a family with a bunch of little kids standing there? That kind of always, yeah. And then she kind of disappeared into the background for a while, and you really don't see her much on the campaign trail right now. And people should be asking maybe why. Is she not behind this Senate campaign? Is she, is there an issue there? What's going on? We haven't seen hide nor hair of her really. It's just been him out on the campaign trail, and for the most part, he's hit a few places around the state with his make stuff cost less. Wow, that's some next level projection right there. Oh.
Right?
Yeah, that was my initial thought. I was like, wait, what? We've just, under the Biden administration, we saw costs soar. And ratcheting that down, especially in the grocery section, is difficult because of the supply chain, because of fuel costs. We've got a war in Iran going on right now. All these things are happening. So it's not really alleviating that much. But Democrats right now are using the same platform that Trump won under. They're basically copying it. They're cribbing it. And that's what he's doing with this campaign. And no single outlet out there has asked him yet, how? How are you going to make things cost less?
Did you see his post about brisket? This was part of his make things cheaper. Okay, so I'm 100% North Carolinian. My roots on both sides have always been here. To see the guy who used to be governor of North Carolina, who should know our state as well as I do, right? Even better, he's older than me. Post about make brisket cheaper in North Carolina made my head explode. Brisket is not to us barbecue, right? Like, it's pork. Pork is barbecue. We are the pork state, right? Like, we have pig pickings, right? Like, it's Texas and Western states that are all into beef. So to watch him pander to a bunch of people who aren't from here about brisket made me want to break things. I was like, you have got to be kidding me.
I missed this. This was sort of like his Cal Cunningham barbecue moment.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And somehow very few people picked up on it. And I was like, are you kidding?
I'm surprised because the media loves to note how much of a diet soda sommelier he is. Yeah. So that always struck me as being kind of trivial. The only thing that he and I actually seem to agree on in terms of outside interests would be the Carolina Hurricanes. I love hockey. I'm not into hockey like most people are, but yeah, I'm a Hurricanes fan. So there we go. But brisket, okay.
Yeah, I mean, and he just dead ass put this out there for all of North Carolina to see, and I was like, are you serious right now? This was like Team Cooper. You know what I mean? And my comment to it was, maybe you should hire actual North Carolinians who understand North Carolina culture, because these kids don't know anything about us.
It sounds like his comms person, whoever's running his X account or his social media accounts, doesn't know what they're talking about. Whoa, okay. You know who I probably wouldn't appreciate that very much are the people in Eastern North Carolina who still aren't in their homes.
I did an entire podcast with Dave Bullock about his report on NCORR, and I was shocked by the amount of people in my comment section who had no idea. They had no clue. And this was information that's been everywhere. I mean, I covered it whenever the NCGA did their whole, session on it. And I'm not somebody who's overly political, and here I was glued.
I've covered every single one of those hearings.
I was glued watching it, making notes.
And what struck me the most was these folks, Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence, they hit, 8 years ago, yeah. And there were a whole swath of these people who were still not in a home. And Cooper's recovery group is NC Recovery and Resilience, NCORR is what the acronym was. It just was absolutely lagging. I mean, it was dinged in federal audits as not spending the money fast enough. They had a horrible turnover rate of getting people back in their houses, the number of houses being built per month. And he had picked this woman, Laura Hogshead, I think she was with HUD before that, brought her down here specifically to run this thing, to get this thing going, and she did not get it going. And the legislators were absolutely livid. Listening to some of the stories and seeing some of the testimony from some of these folks who have been, they had to go through like 8-step processes. In fact, you know what? I wrote this one down because this is important for people to know. All right, so 8-step application process that averaged over 2.5 years, 936 days. That's crazy pants. Construction delays of up to four years after post-eligibility. They were found to be eligible and they were still delays up to 4 years later. Over 1,179 homes still uncompleted years later. This was like, that stat is from like a year ago when they did the last hurricane meeting. Massive budget shortfalls that reached $297 million. That was a little nugget that came out, I believe it was in 2024, right before the biennial budget was going to drop, and they just hidden in like the last page of his budget asks was this to fund NCORR a little bit more. Poor data management, duplicate and ineligible projects, excessive temporary housing costs. One household exceeded $230,000 in those costs. State audits, 2 of them in a row, gave them failing marks. And I think the most damning thing about NCORR, though, was I think a lot of people don't realize that when Josh Stein came into office and started NCGrow, that was a brand new project. He completely shed NCORR. He wasn't going to have anything to do with that. And that one speaks volumes to me, that he found it to be that much of a problem that he would get rid of it. And I think a lot of people also don't realize that NCORR, the Laura Hogshead, that woman, she took a powder. After, I believe it was a 2024 hearing, she after that, about 3 weeks later, she was gone. Now, the agency wouldn't say whether she was fired, whether she resigned, whether, it was a mutual thing. They wouldn't say one way or the other. She was just gone. And they stuck in someone else to take over, and he hasn't really done very much either. So I have a feeling we're going to see some revisiting on that one.
Before I interviewed Dave Bullock, I went with a friend of mine because she was like, there's NCORR houses all over northern Bladen County and up around Lumberton, and I'd never seen them. And so she took me out. And what's crazy is it's years later. I mean, we're talking about almost a decade later. Right. And she takes me through Lumberton, and you can still see, you can tell which houses are the NCORR houses. They're still not finished. They're still working on them. And you're talking about more than 1,000 North Carolina families in some of the poorest areas in our state who were ignored, just flat out ignored. They were forced to jump through hoops. They lost everything, and some of them still don't have a place to live.
Oh, they're still living in hotels and things. And some of these folks have medical needs and that kind of thing, where they have medical situations where living in a hotel makes that very difficult for them.
I feel like anybody who could overlook that with Cooper really doesn't care about their neighbors at all.
And that's another place where you're seeing this massive projection. They're talking about, Wally was a recovery czar. No, he really wasn't. He was put on this recovery council, which had multiple other people on it, and it was mostly a figurehead kind of thing to kind of see where, projects needed to be, fulfilled or whatever they could take in public comment, that kind of stuff. But they weren't really an administrative agency. They weren't really in charge of getting the money out. Things did slow down just a little bit under Kristin O.M. because she put this rule into place that anything over a certain amount had to have her review on it or whatever, and that slowed things down a bit, but now that's been removed. And Secretary Mullen has basically started he opened the floodgates, and I think there's been 2 releases of funds over $200 million, one of them just recently. And he visited the western part of the state. Good on him for going to the Lion's Den and, seeing what's really going on. But, we've gotten somewhere between 5 and 7 million out of FEMA and HUD and all that combined. they estimated that Helene was like 58 billion in damage kind of thing. And of course, there's state match, and the state has ponied up a couple billion, to do their kind of work. And they're complaining about the speed of the money getting here. And I think that that's going to shift pretty rapidly.
I hope so.
President Trump made it very clear that he was not going to forget about North Carolina. I mean, one of the first things he did was stop here.
I'm not a Piedmont girl, you know what I mean? I have roots on the coast in Wilmington, and I have roots in Canton, which is just on the other side of Asheville. And so these storms, like, they directly impacted everybody that I love, everybody I've ever known. Like, it's going home to Western North Carolina, and I went a couple of times after Helene, Swannanoa just broke me. I mean, it broke me. And then we went to Lake Lure almost a month ago, probably right out a month ago. It's opened up now, but you go up the road to Bat Cave and you see the devastation that's still there, and it's shocking. And here's Cooper saying, "Oh, look at all the good I did." Really? Because you completely forgot about all of my people across the state.
He pulled out the National Guard right before Thanksgiving. A lot of people, I think, don't understand that either, is that when that storm hit, there was not a lot of movement out of the Cooper administration. In fact, they didn't even appoint someone to be the liaison for the storm for FEMA. And he was on his way out the door at that point.
And now Western North Carolina looks like it might flip blue. Make that make sense. I can't, for the life of myself, I cannot wrap my head around that.
Well, there's a difference between perceived issue and real issue. Like, who's really to blame for the situation? And part of it is, Mother Nature's going to do what Mother Nature does, and it destroyed that part of the state. But the Biden administration was in place when this happened. They could have released all this funding back then, but they didn't. They waited until the election happened and it became Trump's problem. So that needs to be mitigated a little bit. But by the same token, they're frustrated. They should be frustrated. There are a lot of folks out there who still don't have their roads up and running, their sewers up and running. There's a lot of water facilities that need to be fixed out there. And that's all fine and good. But for Cooper to be walking around out there saying that it's somebody else's fault when it happened on his watch, and he could have put things in place to make life easier, that's different. I mean, these folks were, and the snows came early. The cold weather came early. These folks were sitting out there in tents and that kind of thing. And, FEMA, I don't think, got on the ground with that kind of support for several weeks after the storm. And part of that was logistics. These happened up in the mountains. How do you get to some of these folks? There's a lot of things like that that were a problem, but they didn't seem to be a problem for the volunteers.
Yeah, I was going to say, that offended me because I'm a hillbilly.
Yeah.
My personality, 100% hillbilly. I love moonshine. I'll get in a fight. I don't care. I'm very hillbilly. And all I could think was, who could have got those trailers moved up there? My papaw, my daddy, any one of my uncles, any of my cousins. They could have done it. But you're telling me that the state of North Carolina, that the U.S. government can't manage it, but we could do it?
Well, the good old boys with the three-wheelers and everything, they're the ones who, on a horseback, they're the ones who got things up in there, the supplies. They got people down off the mountain. And then, you've got Samaritan's Purse, who did a ton of work out there. They're still doing work out there, rebuilding homes and that sort of thing. And you also had the Amish. They built how many houses out there?
I'm in Lake Lure. It was awesome. I drove right past them, waved. I didn't film them because I knew that was disrespectful.
How can that happen? We have the federal government with millions and billions of dollars, but we have this little Amish community who managed to mobilize and build hundreds of houses in the time that it took them to get out of bed.
And then we had Democrat government saying, no, you can't rebuild here. I adored Jonah Garson, personally. I didn't like his stances, and I interviewed him. And he said, I think we need to get used to the fact that there are some places you just shouldn't build. And I'm a heritage hillbilly. My family's lived in Western North Carolina always, so some of the first settlers up there. Our land, a hillbilly's land, that's like your mama. Yeah. And to hear somebody who has so much power say something like that about where I'm from and know the way that that impacts our culture and the way that that impacts people who live there was shocking to me. And he straight up meant it.
There's an ivory tower mentality that I've noticed. It's only gotten stronger in the last decade, where there's a I know what's best for you because I'm smarter than you. I've got a better education than you. I call it experting. People are experting me. They did it during COVID. They did it during Common Core. You know, the experts came out and said, "Oh, little mother, you don't know what you're talking about." You know.
I disagree. I homeschooled my kids, never used Common Core, and they're smarter than most kids who graduate today.
I kind of became the face of that thing in North Carolina at one point. I crisscrossed the state talking about that stuff because my son was in kindergarten when it got implemented. And I got pulled into a meeting with the principal, the vice principal, a caseworker, the school psychologist, the teacher, and one other person. And it's me with my youngest in the stroller, a little baby in the stroller, and I'm feeding him Cheerios, and I'm listening to them tell me that he's not doing reading comprehension at grade level. Now, this is early in kindergarten. He's 5, right? And I said, okay, wait a minute. I'm like, is he getting A's? Yeah, and is he getting passing, is he doing well? Can he read? Yeah, actually, he can read a couple grade levels ahead. But he just can't comprehend a couple grade levels ahead at age 5, is what you're telling me. And I just looked around the table and I said, y'all, this is a giant waste of time. I said, he is doing exactly what he needs to be doing at exactly the age he needs to be doing it. And I said, if this is about Common Core and Common Core standards, you can just blow it out your ass. And that was pretty much it.
They did the same thing to us with my oldest. We got pulled in and told that she couldn't read. And I worked at night at the time. It was just my husband. Thank God I wasn't there because but he comes home and he tells me that they said she can't read. And so I got her up on my lap and I opened a book and I said, baby girl, read this to me. And she read it. And he said, I looked at the teacher and I said, is it that she can't read or that you're not a good teacher? Oof. And the principal looked at him and he said, Mr. Clark, I'm so sorry. And Brandon was like, that was it. He was like, I left. And I was like, I don't understand. How does that happen? Because she went to a school that had tiny class sizes. It wasn't like this overfilled classroom where she was somehow lost in the shuffle. You know what I mean? Like, how would you know that she can't read? And she didn't. She had no idea. Yeah. This was right when Common Core started. And for me, that was kind of like right then I was thinking something's going on. And by the time she was in 4th or 5th grade, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to get arrested. And so I pulled him out and homeschooled, and best decision ever.
Well, education is another thing where Cooper's kind of fought the mainstream. Well, it's not just Cooper, it's the Democrats in general. They seem opposed to the general idea of school choice. At first they fought the charters and everything. They haven't come for the homeschoolers yet, and they don't want to do that because you guys have matches and you'll ride at dawn. That's what I've learned about homeschoolers. But, they started, picking at the charter schools, saying they're stealing public funds. And no, they're public schools. They're funded just like public schools. They just are funded at a lower rate. But then the Opportunity Scholarship Program came out. And at first it had a cap on it, number of students could be in it. And then they removed the cap. And they funded that through a separate piggy bank of funds, a separate reserve fund is specified for that program. It doesn't come out of the education budget. It doesn't come out of there at all. But once again, they're stealing funds from public education. Then they opened it up, that scholarship fund in 2023 to every student in the state, but on a sliding scale based on your income. So, the lower income households would get a bigger amount of up to $7,000, and the wealthier families would get a smaller one between $1,500 and $2,000. And that's a drop in the bucket when it comes to the tuition for some of these places, right? And a lot of them were religious schools, so that was also a problem. I said they were unaccountable, et cetera, et cetera. And Cooper, in every single budget that he put out, he tried to cut that program, tried to get rid of its funding, tried to slash it, tried to put a moratorium on it. Governor Stein is doing that in his current budget.
What's crazy about that is so my nephews go to a private Christian school, and that program benefits minorities more than whites. If you go to their school, you can see it. that it is more than fairly balanced, and that a lot of low-income families are using that as an option for better education. And yet here is Cooper and Stein, who say that they're all about making life easier for minorities, making life easier for people who struggle, who are living in poverty, and yet they're wanting to rip away benefits that are improving their lives.
Well, it's the better fit for the kid. I mean, who's to say? The parents honestly know what's best for the kid, and this is the choice that they want to make for their child's education. They should. We can customize everything from our cell phones to our salads, but we can't customize our kids' education, please. And this goes along with Cooper's current, make stuff cost less. You know what would make stuff cost less? Opportunity scholarship program. That would make tuition cost less for families who want to do that. So, a lot of people don't understand too that he sent one of his kids to a private school. And he says, well, I paid for that myself. Well, yeah, there's a lot of families who can't pay for that themselves, but would like to have that opportunity that you had. So, show me the beef.
I mean, I would have loved to have sent mine to a private school. I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
To be able to homeschool my kids, me and my husband worked off schedules, so we hardly ever saw each other. And then when he started making enough money and we got out of debt, I quit my job, so we sacrificed making more money so that my children could get a better education.
Yep.
How nice would have it been to be able to send them to private school?
So many people have told me that same thing, and from a personal perspective, I would have loved to have used the Opportunity Scholarship Program. However, my husband and I's combined income, we were just over the threshold where we could be eligible for it. And, not by a lot either. And I was like, God, that would really help. We could do this. We could make this work if we were to have that money. But we were just outside the limit. And then in 2023, when they expanded it, we were beyond the window for my oldest. He was graduated. He graduated last year. And then my youngest is just in high school now, and he doesn't want to switch schools at this point. So, the window where, K through 5, where I really would have wanted to send them somewhere, we made too much money. And not by a lot. And there were a lot of families stuck in that little niche area there where they were just making too much, but they, it would have made the difference for them. And to deny that, I think that anyone on the other side of the fence wanting to cut that program or wanting to put a moratorium on that program, I think they're on the wrong side of the point that it should be about the kid and the education that the family wants them to get. And wherever that is, whether it's public, charter, private, homeschool, whatever that is, it should be a no-brainer. You shouldn't be putting up roadblocks.
Well, they don't want you to have freedom of choice, because if you have freedom of choice, then you're not being spoon-fed whatever BS they're teaching you in classes today.
That's part of it, but also I think it's a funding thing. If you look at it, in public education, who do the teachers' unions back? And do the teachers' unions like charter schools? Do they like voucher programs? Do they like scholarship programs like this? Oh, no. No, they want to kill them dead. So, there's a major fundraising arm, a major support arm for the Democrat Party. So, of course, they're going to stand against these things.
Yeah, well, why do what's best for the American people?
And Democrats who do espouse a positive attitude towards the school choice issue often get excommunicated, for lack of a better term. I mean, there have been a couple school choice issues that some of the Democrats who were targeted in this last cycle here in North Carolina, who lost their primary races, like Nassif Majid and Shelley Willingham and Carla Cunningham, they've actually been quite center line about this. Whatever's best for the kid should be best for the kid. And I'm trying to remember the politician who lost to Rodney Pierce up in Orange County, Durham area. He lost his seat because he backed school choice. And they put up Pierce against him. Cooper put up Pierce against him, and Pierce won. He tried to take back his seat this time. I want to say it was Garrett. But I'd have to go look. Yeah, that was a thing. That, the party disloyalty got them primary challenges. And that was something that Cooper wielded over the Democrats during his 2 terms as governor. You either stay in line and you uphold my veto, or you're going to get a primary challenge. And it happened multiple times. A couple of people managed to escape it, but, it happened.
Almost like the mob, doesn't it?
It was. And it was because they didn't uphold his vetoes, all 104 of them. Now, not all 104 underwent a veto override thing. I think about 50% of his bills were overridden. The ones that mattered, once they got a supermajority, those just flew through. They didn't even bat an eye. They just did it. Now, in the last term, we were one shy in the House. Tricia Cotham came over to the Republican Party. She was also big school choice proponent, and that was one of the reasons she was targeted. Increasingly so when she was a Democrat, to the point where she flipped party affiliations and went Republican. That was a big thing. Anyone who wants to hear more about that should go look up WBT's Brett Jensen. He did some interviews with her about her flip and about some of the reasons why she did it. And I think that would be illuminating for folks. But there were several Democrats who, wouldn't go on record, who you'll see in reports, in different media outlets that basically say, we were told to stay in line or we would get primaried. So that was the kind of power that he wielded over them. He's always been a big fundraiser, Roy Cooper, anyway.
Yeah, but he doesn't do that here.
No, he doesn't.
He goes to New York and California.
A lot of his individual contributions, though, most of them did come from North Carolinians. But a lot of the PAC money and a lot of the bigger donors, the bigger dollar figures, they did come from out of state. So, it is what it is. He's always fundraised out of state. In fact, I think he was in New York City when Helene hit. Folks should know that one too.
And he knew it was coming.
Yeah,
he knew it was coming and chose. Yep.
Yeah. So, it is what it is. During COVID, there is a sense of, how do I put this? There was a sense of being frozen in time for a while there. And for media, it was the same way, because we were basically sitting there on our computers waiting for the governor to make an announcement or an EO or that kind of thing. And, he did a lot of actions in the very beginning without approval of the Council of State for certain executive actions, like the statewide emergency order where he shut down the state. He kept that in place for 888 days. And he kept saying that the legislature can end it anytime they want to. No, they really can't. You did it by executive order.
When Mamaw died, she died in a nursing home during COVID. They had just allowed for visits through plexiglass or through the windows. And I had an appointment set up. I was going to get to be the second person who saw her. One of my aunts got to see her first, and I was so excited. Mamaw raised me. And right before that weekend happened, she passed away.
Oh, gosh.
And so they take her to the hospital. They won't let anybody go in with her. And so I get a phone call, and I find out that she had died in there by herself. Furious does not even cover it. Just absolutely disgusted with the system that allowed that to happen. And at that point, I was like, I'm done. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not getting any more shots. I already had tachycardia. I'd already stressed and been freaked out. And I was like, no, fuck it. We're going to go and live our lives. And that's what we did from that point on. And I wish I had been like that from the beginning, because I'd watched all these other people do it. They were like, screw it. I'm not doing that. And they didn't. Yeah. And I feel guilty for abiding by Cooper's tyrannical orders.
And you weren't alone. The Reopen NC people all felt like that too. But it wasn't just them. It was the bars and taverns too. A lot of people probably don't understand that he issued executive orders that shut down private bars, privately owned bars, but restaurants that had bars in them could operate normally. So they've got lawsuits that are still pending right now. And
churches were closed. We couldn't go to church.
Yeah. That got overturned pretty darn fast. So that went to the courts, and they basically said, yeah, you're violating their constitutional right to freedom of religion right there. So they also tried to sue the Speedway, Ace Speedway. They were holding outdoor socially distanced races, and they shut that down. Mandy Cohen, his DHHS secretary at the time, she shut that down, threatened a lawsuit, sued him. And that to me was hilarious because, I mean, here you have an outdoor venue, a big, wide outdoor venue, and she was shutting it down. And I think the salt in the wound of that one was that later on, I think a couple years ago, after she was gone from DHS and she was actually gone from being CDC director at that point, she went on an interview with someone and she told them that she was laughing and she was basically telling them, I used to just check with some of my friends in other states and see what they were doing, and then we would just do it. And then she laughed about it. You know, so they follow the science. No, just follow whatever your friends in New Jersey are doing. I mean, come on. You know,
I feel like people forgot what it was like during COVID under Cooper.
A lot of people have, or they've willfully forgotten it because they really don't want to remember that.
I think that they've also forgotten his soft on crime policies. And that just rubs me wrong because I remember I'm an 80s baby, right? And so I'm an older millennial. I grew up in the 90s. Race really wasn't that big of an issue for us. I mean, we were, you know, going out and partying and having a good time, and it didn't matter what color you were. Like, we were just hanging out.
I got a decade on you, and we were like that too.
What 20 teens roll around and all of a sudden race is an issue again, and I'm like, what happened? Like, what happened? And then the Black Lives Matter riots start happening, and in the newspaper I'm seeing people like Cooper say, oh, this was a peaceful protest. Really? Because I can remember somebody setting himself on fire. I remember somebody getting their head bashed in the mall parking lot, covering the looting that was going on and almost dying. Like, I don't know what everybody was thinking across the country, but to be here in a place where it happened, it's like, you're blatantly lying to the people.
It's that time period during COVID when the riots happened in Raleigh in May. They started out during the day as being marches and protests with very little disturbance, which was fine. But the minute the sun went down, all bets were off. You had all kinds of, like you said, burning, looting, rioting, this kind of stuff. And he put out a message the next day that he was afraid that the media reports on this were losing the message that this was about racial justice and the death of George Floyd. And it doesn't matter what property was destroyed, basically. That, in a nutshell, that's sort of what he said. And the folks whose businesses were burned out in Raleigh, some of them left Raleigh after that, openly came out and said, where the hell were you? Where the hell were the police? Nobody came to help them. They were having to defend their businesses themselves, or they came in the next day and found their business completely destroyed. They burned out the CVS that was down on Fayetteville Street. I used to work around the corner from there.
Walmart in Fayetteville was destroyed, and this is when COVID's going on. And so this is a place that needs to be open because it has a pharmacy in it.
Oh no, looted totally.
Completely destroyed.
And that was somebody's only source. They'd have to drive elsewhere to go get what they needed to. But it was also, you know, COVID, the restrictions that were in place at that time was the social distancing, you know, the six feet of separation, the masks, the whole 9 yard. Yeah, unless you were riding, and then that was fine. But if you were a reopened NC protester, you got singled out and taken down like this one woman, Monica Ussery, was. The police decided they were going to make an example out of her, and they circled her out of the crowd that was there that day, got in on her, and they arrested her for violating Governor Cooper's orders. Not a single one of the rioters that was arrested that night for other charges was charged with violating the governor's orders. I haven't found a single one. So there was that difference there. And that it should also be noted, I think the one thing that really kind of I found interesting, and as my husband put it this way, he says, it really chapped my ass to see him out there marching with the protesters the day after Raleigh had basically been burned to the ground, which is what he did. And you know, CBS 17 got him on camera doing it, and I hadn't seen it originally, and then when I finally got my hands on the video and I watched it, I went, holy crap, he really did that. But he did it in a very hurried way where it was sort of, I'm out here to make sure that everyone sees my face, that I'm on their side. That was the vibe I got from it. And I think that's the vibe a lot of people got from it. And former law enforcement have told me that that incident really, really upset them, because they have been, they have been assaulted. They had Molotov cocktails thrown at them. There were shots fired at them.
There was gunfire. We live in a neighborhood that's sandwiched between two main streets. And you could hear gunfire from the time the sun went down until probably 2 or 3 in the morning. We had to make both of our daughters come out of their bedrooms and sleep in the den, in the floor, because we live in a brick house and it was the most protected room. And that's where my girls slept that night, because you could hear gunfire on either side of our neighborhood all night long.
And it didn't abate, I bet.
I don't even remember seeing a newspaper article about it.
For 3 days in a row, they burned and looted most of the cities. Charlotte had the same kind of thing going on. There was stuff going on in Greensboro, the same thing in Durham in certain spots, not to the same degree as Raleigh. But there was a tip that I received, and I followed up on it later, but I couldn't get any corroborating documents, so I didn't report on it at the time. But Antifa from out of state was here. I managed to go down to a spot where I knew they were staying at a hotel where someone had tipped me off. And in that parking lot, there were some vehicles with out-of-state license plates from New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Florida, Michigan, one as far as Nebraska. All in the same kind of part of the parking lot around the side of the building where you wouldn't want to go look at the cars. There was a huge parking lot empty in the front, but they decided they were going to park on the side. And one of the folks who worked at the hotel was the one who knew me and tipped me off and came down and said that I've seen them coming in and out. They're all dressed in black from head to toe. This is Antifa. They're now here. And I passed that on to law enforcement. I don't know what they did with that tip, but probably nothing. They had their hands full down there. And these guys have told me stories, and look for my article in May sometime. I've got more of what they've told me coming. So I don't want to tip my hand too much, but there's a whole other side to that night that people don't know.
Well, it's more than just the riots, right? There was the sexual assault kits that never got tested.
That one was something that I wrote about for quite a bit there, and then other outlets started picking up on it after that. I got a tip from an individual who told me that there were over 10,000 of these kits sitting untested. And this was 2017-ish, 2016-ish when I first found out. It was when Cooper was first running for governor. And his spokesperson at the time said that there was no backlog at the crime lab, that there was no backlog. He when asked about it, they basically said there is no backlog. So I was like, okay, well, there or isn't there? So I called around and I got some basic numbers, and then I found a national website that was tracking these things by state, and that one said we had over 15,000 of them. We were number 1 in the country for untested rape kits. He was asked about it, dodged it, and then Josh Stein became AG. Now, he actually did something about it, so I'll give him credit where credit's due.
It's almost like Stein comes along and cleans up Cooper's messes.
Maybe he has the sweep up crew.
Yeah, like he moves up right behind him and then has to clean up his messes, right? I mean, he did it with the rape kits, he did it with COVID, he did it with NCORR, not COVID, but Helene.
A little bit. He's differentiated himself by taking action where Cooper didn't, which is to his credit. I will give credit where credit's due. He got funding to test a lot of these kits. However, the audit that he did showed that there was at least 2,000 more than that 15,000 that was going on there. And then there was also a slice of agencies who didn't report at all, so that could have been even higher. And when he declared that he declared in 2023 or 2024, I'm trying to remember when it was, that it was 2024. He declared the backlog has been cleared. But the dashboard told a different story. The dashboard said there were still thousands out there that were untested. And while it said that the dashboard was up to date and was updated daily and everything like that, I really didn't see a whole lot of change going on it. I haven't checked on it in the last 6 to 8 months. So, but there's still a rolling backlog of these things. It's not cleared. It's an ongoing thing. You can't clear something like that. It's always going to be going on. But the original caseload, there was still 1,000 or so of those left when he said he had cleared it. So there it is. And there are all kinds of problems with the crime lab while Roy Cooper was Attorney General, and folks need to remember that this was a whole thing. This was a whole scandal. Cases mishandled, evidence mishandled, incompetent staff, fired staff. This backlog apparently ramped up, and he had really done not much about it. So that was the lead up into his gubernatorial run. A lot of people didn't pick up on that one. So it is what it is. He has a really good way of giving people amnesia about his past dealings, because he doesn't really come out and do a lot of FaceTime in the media. He'll put out statements on social media or through a spokesperson or through somebody else, but he doesn't really do a whole hell of a lot of FaceTime on his own, which is maybe why people don't associate some of these things with him. Again, the transparency thing, 8 emails, it is what it is. And right now, he's actually making some stops in certain cities, but these are curated visits. He has a stop in mind. He gets there. There are people who have already responded to an email or something saying that they would come that are friendlies. He shows up to the event. There's usually an elected official who's a friendly. They have their little talk. He sits at a podium. He makes a couple comments, and then he leaves. No questions, usually. These are curated events. I mean, these are campaign-style events, and most of them are curated. You'll see the same thing happen on the other side of the aisle. Michael Whatley will hold some events, and they'll be slightly curated, but at least it's open to most press. A lot of these events are not open to all press. So, it is what it is.
It, to use your husband's turn of phrase, it chaps my ass, right? There's also the cashless bail.
Yes.
And there's let's see, I can't remember how many prisoners it was who were released during COVID. Some of them went on to...
around 3,500. At least 51 of them were life sentence people. There were multiple ones in there who had aggravated assaults that were violent. And, excuse me, when this agreement was supposedly going on, officials were trying to say that, no, it wouldn't involve people who had done violent crimes. It did. And DeCarlos Brown's name ended up on the list. And the explanation was, well, he would have been released anyway. He met the criteria. So, that's how his name showed up on the list. There's been a lot of back and forth about that, but there really hasn't been anything directly from Cooper saying why he was on the list, or if he knew who was actually on the list. Did he actually read the list? Did he have someone who went down through these individuals to see, if they actually qualified for this program? No, it was a sue and settle situation. Civil rights groups said, oh, you're violating these people's rights by having them in jail during COVID, and you should be releasing some of them. We were already releasing thousands of people a day across the country due to COVID, who, were within 6 months of their release, or, had low-level offenses, or, possession of pot, or something like that, where it wasn't like a violent offense. They were already being released. This was an additional 3,500 on top of that. And the actual agreement was never released. It still hasn't been released. There's a version of it out there that's redacted that you can look at. There's a version that was filed with the courts that you can look at, but it doesn't include the list of names. Just the criteria. So then when the list finally got released, but it was only the prison numbers, so you had to literally go through the system and match them up with their names. And there's a independent journalist called Stephen Horn, I think, is doing that. He's creating a whole database. He's creating a database you can search for these people. So I found that interesting. I'm just wondering how many have a violent background and how many don't. And, the 50-something life sentence people, how the hell did they get on the list? I mean, that's a little mind-boggling.
It kind of says that he really wasn't paying attention, right? I mean, to me, that suggests he wasn't paying attention. But then again, he's pretty soft on crime.
Well, I mean, just look at what he let go on with the riots. You know, he waited, he said that he had to wait for the cities to call in the National Guard. No, he didn't. He could have done that himself. That is one of the powers of the governor, and he didn't do it. I have on good authority that they were staged outside of Raleigh already because they were stood up for COVID, for basic COVID responses and everything. And so they're already stood up. There was a platoon of them sitting down the road there, and they could have been brought in the first night, and they weren't. Instead, he waited until Marianne Baldwin, the former mayor, decided to write a declaration asking for them. No, he could have done that the first night. Didn't do it.
It's all very intentional, which bothers me.
Well,
And now you want to run as senator?
yeah, I mean, and these, you have the juxtaposition of these people who are losing their livelihoods because they're closed already because of COVID. And now their stores are trashed. And the National Guards get sent in the night after to protect the already trashed stores. What? I mean, it just didn't make sense to me. If that kind of activity was going on down there, and I mean, the police were overrun. I don't care what the after action report says. The police were overrun in certain spots that first night. And I know this for a fact, and it will come out later. But
Talk about the history, let's talk about the